This is RT International. One of the UK's most notorious refugee removal centres, Yarlswood, has long been in the centre of public attention. This is just one of the very latest protests. Earlier in the year, the facility saw a string of rallies over reports of detainee abuse. However, management seems to have responded to the criticism, recently introducing an array of changes. A whole variety of activities have now been made available for detainees. That includes bingo, yoga, dance classes. There's also a cafe that is said to provide food from various countries. On top of that, the management has also provided the female migrants with a beauty salon. But according to one inmate known as D, the changes are purely cosmetic.
Healthcare is very, very, very bad. It takes 2 weeks to be seen by the doctor. Every week there are people falling because they are epileptic and they are not getting their medication. There are always cases of people dying.
An independent monitoring group has just released a damning report focusing on the damaging effects of indefinite and lengthy detention at the facility. In one of the most striking examples, it describes how a woman was held there for 800 days. D once again says that jail will be better than this migration centre.
We used to do room checks quite often, randomly. And they could come early in the morning, 9 o'clock, they get you. It's better to have a jail sentence than being detained because you don't know the outcome. I'm not interested in anything because I'm really, really withdrawn. I only wake up, sit down. I just want to sit. I don't want to do anything. I'm not interested in anything because I feel I'm in a box.
We spoke to Noel Finn, a mental health nurse who used to work at that facility. He says the whole place needs to be overhauled.
The behaviour and attitudes of the officers and the regime of Yarlswood hasn't changed by the impact it's having on the residents within the detainees within Yarlswood. I'm happy to see that the IMB are on the ground and looking and talking to the residents, but I do still think this is the tip of the iceberg. I think there's a lot more going on in Yarlswood than what this report is actually saying.
The removal centre has been surrounded by controversies since it opened in 2001. Multiple reports of the abuse of detainees emerged over the years, paired with complaints over the staff's degrading behaviour towards women. Yarlswood has also seen almost yearly hunger strikes by the migrants, with the most recent one taking place just this spring. In fact, that was prompted by the death of a detainee there. And we did ask the UK Home Office for comment on the indefinite detention of migrants at the facility. In response, the Home Office defended its right to send back migrants that have no permission to stay in the UK, adding that they also have the authority to enforce their removal. It also said the Home Secretary commissioned an independent review of that centre. An activist from a charity that looks into healthcare for migrants, he says the report changes very little for the detainees.
And there is then a crescendo of media interest and exposure. Then eventually the Home Office have commissioned a review on a number of instances. That review typically has been delayed in being published, but when it is, the Home Office say, oh, well, it's just a few rotten apples and we fixed the problems in the intervening years in any case. But then the problems still go on, and it's been that kind of cycle through Yarlswood and in fact across all immigration removal centres, definitely since 2001.
As more young men and women fall into the hands of extremists, there's no let-up in ideas about how best to tackle Islamic State. Just days after the US authorized 450 more military advisors, the Pentagon now says America's reach may have to extend even further. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Martin Dempsey, says the U.S. Army will sprout so-called lily pads in Iraq, special bases for instructors to train local forces. He says the Pentagon is constantly looking into whether more of these hubs will be needed to fight the extremists. But Dempsey's statements don't seem to go in line with the White House, whose spokesman says there are no immediate plans whatsoever for any more Army sites. We asked Lawrence Wilkerson, the former Chief of Staff to Colin Powell, about his views on the matter.
I personally don't think that any amount of advisors is going to be able to instill the kind of feeling, nationalist, whatever you want to call it, in the Iraqi military that will give it the kind of steel, the kind of backbone it needs to stand up to ISIS. I think it's going to guarantee a situation we've already seen develop in Iraq when American forces stayed way over their time, and a situation that we're looking at in Afghanistan where American forces are going to withdraw and Afghanistan is more or less going to go back to the same war zone it was before the Americans ever arrived. So this is not a viable strategy. It's a murderous strategy. It's going to get young boys and young girls killed, and it's going to kill other people on the end of their weapons, and it's going to produce nothing.
It's RT International. We've all heard scare stories of how hackers can crack your computer, your phone, even your bank account as well. But now a cybersecurity expert in America claims hospitals could be vulnerable to attack, this with potentially fatal consequences. His research shows that equipment used to administer drugs could be tampered with to cause a lethal overdose. Some life-saving drugs can be dangerous, of course, if the maximum dose is exceeded. For example, heparin, used to prevent blood clotting, that could cause an unstoppable bleed. Insulin, which controls blood sugar levels, that could lead to a coma. And an overdose of morphine, well, of course, that could kill the patient. Now, many drugs like this are administered to hospital patients by computerized pumps. The software sets the dosage. But cyber expert Beliau has discovered faults which could allow hackers to access the data.
These pumps are actually just really computers. And so just as you would take your laptop and join a wireless network, these pumps are on networks as well. Also, if you wanted to, for example, change the configuration of a pump, you could do that remotely through the wireless interface. If you wanted to upload a new, what they call a drug library to the pump, you could do that through one of the servers on the hospital network. And so once someone understands how that's done, they can basically start to issue their own commands to the pump and make the pump do things that it was probably not designed to do. They're very easy to exploit. So they're extremely easy to exploit. And so anyone that got access to the wireless networks that these pumps are on, anyone could do this. And it's just a matter of time before someone figures out how to do this. I've looked at a variety of medical devices over the last couple years. A lot of them do have security issues. And if you have software, there's going to be bugs.
Some other global headlines now in brief. The Greek government trying to work out how its financial bailout program will continue. Talks deadlocked when the International Monetary Fund delegation abandoned negotiations and flew back home from Brussels over major differences with Athens. The Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras does not want to impose higher taxes, and he doesn't want to cut pensions any further, something that lenders say are critical for continued help. Greece needs a deal to unlock aid before the end of the month, when it could default on a €1.6 billion repayment to the IMF. Now, while there is uncertainty over a deal, there are continued anti-austerity protests in Athens. Demonstrators accusing the government of planning to sign off on another round of tough measures. And 4 fishermen have been rescued off the coast of Alaska. Their vessel was already partially submerged when the Coast Guard helicopter arrived. You can see there the crew launched a life raft and jumped into the water in their red survival suits. And as the very last fisherman was saved, the entire fishing vessel went down. Workers in the South Korean capital, Seoul, are spraying antiseptic solution in public places in order to prevent the spread of the deadly MERS virus. So far, 11 people have died in the country after contracting Middle East respiratory syndrome. At least 122 are infected. The outbreak is the biggest outside of Saudi Arabia, where the virus was first detected 3 years ago. And a football-themed demonstration demanding changes to Chile's education system has been held in the Chilean capital during the opening match of a major tournament. The protesters, who were kicking plastic balls in the streets, were dispersed by water cannons when they tried to break through fencing restricting the rally. There's been frequent protests over the education system in the country since 2011, when the government announced plans to divert more resources to private education. A school in Sweden has sparked national debate by banning the country's flag at graduation ceremonies. On the day, it's customary for Swedish high school students to don sailor caps and dress up in blue and yellow. But when one multicultural class wanted to spice up the event with flags of other countries, they were hit with a ban. Well, the head teacher explained his decision, saying that no one should feel offended on the day, adding that, quote, he didn't want to risk anything. Well, the story apparently became the most shared on social media in that region. Some called for the teacher to resign. Others felt nostalgic about the good old days when no one policed the graduation ceremony. And this user is waiting for the national colours to be banned as well.
Someone can always be offended by something. Someone can always be, get their feelings hurt because they feel excluded or something like that. But it's soon enough we won't be able to wear any shapes or any color combinations because someone somewhere will have their feelings hurt. I'm actually surprised that there still is a cross on the Swedish flag. I expect them to be coming for that here shortly too. This is the slippery slope towards censorship and removal of any kind of national identity.
This is RT International. A Russian extreme sportsman has become the first man ever to ski into an active volcano. Ivan Malakhov was dropped from a helicopter over the crater on the Kamchatka Peninsula here in Russia. He free fell more than 12 meters and then skied right down to the vent. The volcano is over 2,300 meters high and known for its dangerous sudden emissions of hot gas and steam. Now, a U.S. prankster and journalist has asked the people of San Diego to sign a petition, albeit a fake petition, to nuke Russia to maintain America's superiority. The results might disturb you.
They're violating the UN. They're violating the UN sanctions, so we're going to launch a preemptive nuclear strike. I appreciate your supporting a nuclear attack on Russia. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Support the preemptive nuclear strike.
Disappoint me, because this is the only thing I really signed for him.
President's plan to launch the preemptive nuclear demonstration against Russia for violating the just a preemptive demonstration of America's nuclear capabilities. Just print, birth date, and a signature. It's the best thing we can do to maintain our superiority.
Well, we decided to conduct a similar poll right here on the streets of Moscow.
Они могут много чего, но это не методы, чтобы пускать в них ракеты и уничтожать ни в чем не повинный народ.
Вы что, издеваетесь?
Подпишите петицию.
Ой, сынок. Нежелательно, конечно.
Потому что это не решение вопроса.
Thanks for joining us here on RT International. Up next, a look at the years of Vladimir Putin as the president of Russia.